All right. Well, our next question, Jim, sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Jason in Baltimore. With WWE's near steady decline in popularity over the past 20 years, why do they continue at this point to run large arenas in most markets for their TV tapings? This past Monday's Raw in St. Paul, Minnesota, had about 5,000 people in an 18,000-seat arena. Do some of these arenas have exclusive rights? I know from experience, 5,000 people in a 5,000-seat arena looks and sounds better than 5,000 and 20,000.
You are correct, sir. Yes, sir. I'm not saying it's never happened that a building would, in a market, under some circumstances, would have an exclusive deal with the wrestling promotion that, no, you can't go to any other building in this market. But in this day and age, no, it's happening because of habit. It's happening because for so long now, the WWE has booked these buildings. They want to be in the NBA arena. They want to be in the top arena in town. With very few exceptions, they feel like that it is a bad PR thing, a bad look, a bad impression if they're in less than the major arena. I remember there was many times, especially right before the Attitude Era, where if they came to Louisville, they would still run the Gardens instead of Freedom Hall. Matter of fact, in February 96, the WWF did a pay-per-view in the Louisville Gardens instead of in Freedom Hall. They sold out the Gardens, but that's still 14,000 less they could have gotten Freedom Hall because they weren't on that hot streak yet, where they had been running big buildings, in their own territory since the company started and since the national expansion of the 80s, but they would still, especially in a market that they didn't expect to do well in, they'd go to a smaller building and follow that principle. It looks better filled up than it does versus 5,000 people in a 5,000-seat building looks better than 8,000 people in a 20,000-seat building, and it's also more financially profitable to put the 5,000 in the 5,000-seat building. But then after that run in the Attitude Era and the years since then and the publicly traded company and ticket sales and the revenue from them are less important. Now it's all about the look and all about the aura that the WWE is the premier deal. And they've also got all these relations with all these buildings now. They might not even know who the fucking building managers are in some of these secondary market smaller buildings. So they're just doing what they've been doing. And the pressure has never been less on them to make money either on house shows. Obviously, after the pandemic, that's negligible, but even to make money on the live gate at TV tapings, which before used to be a big deal. And now in the scheme of things with the TV money is fucking catering. So, as long as they can shoot it to where it looks okay for television, and as long as they don't get an edict from either Vince McMahon or Nick Khan, who are the only two people that could probably make those decisions, and then I think Nick Khan would have to sell Vince on it, they're not going to stop running the big buildings because it makes them look less than the biggest deal. Does that make sense to you, Brian?
It does. And if you remember when Monday Night Raw first started, I was at the first Raw at the Manhattan Center, which was an especially small building, but by the summertime, they started going into White Plains and, running buildings WWE had not shot TV in a long time, but you were getting 2,000 people in there making noise, and they were active. So it wasn't like the big fancy Ebersol look of a 1989 Superstars of Wrestling, but it looked different and it felt different, and that worked.
And also the Mid-Hudson Civic Center in Poughkeepsie, New York was one of my favorite places to do Raw. Not because I like Poughkeepsie, but it was a little 2,500 seat building. It was adjoined the hotel that you stayed at, so you didn't even have to fucking go outside to get from your room to the building. The locker rooms were almost non-existent. It was a couple of rooms with a bathroom, which was constantly fucking flooded. And the boys, shit was everywhere. No pun intended. But it was cramped, but the atmosphere was insane because all those people screaming in that small, space. And they did a lot of those buildings, 93, 94, even 95. You see those Raws from those smaller buildings, but at least it was a jazzed up crowd. And there was more energy there in the Mid-Hudson Civic Center in Poughkeepsie than there is in these big arenas because people ain't that excited anymore. But yeah, they've had a number of years to where that this is all they've done. And now the people that work there in the office, this is all they know to do until somebody tells them to do something differently. I remember when I first got there in 96 and they started getting a little bit more talent than they could book on one show, but they hadn't been doing 2 live events in the same night for a while. And I was talking to Ed Cohen, who booked the buildings, and trying to say, can't we do spot shows like the old days where you would go to a high school or a college gym and cut the local sports team in on some of the proceeds and get these guys working at the same time. And they said, well, we can't make any money unless we gross, I think it was $70,000 on a fucking house show. I said, wait a minute. That's renting a building and doing it like normal. If you do a spot show when the expenses are down and the blah, 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 they didn't understand anymore, even the people working there besides Ed Cohen, how to do small spot shows and make a profit anymore. And that was 25 years ago. So imagine now if you tried to get anybody in that office in marketing or promotion or live events or anything, go to fucking Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, talk to the football coach at the high school and see if we can get a sponsor show deal. We can put 2,500 people in there and give everybody on the show a payoff and bring $5 or $10 grand back to the office. How the fuck are we going to do that? So there you go.